Welcome everybody. Thank you very much for attending this launch of our International Alert's Peace of Mind report on mental health and peace building. I'm Hannah Ward. I'm Director of Policy, Advocacy and Communications at International Alert. Just before we begin, to let you know, the webinar is being translated into Russian. So if you would like to listen to the Russian translation, you can click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen and click on Russian. If you want to turn off the interpretation and listen to the original English audio, at any point you can click the interpretation icon once more and just select off or original sound. So without further ado, we'll begin. International Alert has been incorporating mental health and psychosocial support into its peace building work for some time and across a number of our country programs. So we were delighted when the Pears Foundation kindly agreed to fund a piece of research that will allow us to take a closer examination of the effectiveness of these approaches, both to allow us to measure their impact, but also to look at the different ingredients that were enabling their effectiveness. Two of our country programs in Rwanda and Tajikistan opted to take part in this research. Both countries had long-standing projects integrating mental health and psychosocial support into peace-building interventions. The research showed significant improvements in mental health and well-being across both contexts and strong linkages with these outcomes and broader peace-building objectives. So today you'll hear from our colleagues who delivered these projects. Pacifique Barihuta, who is the program manager in Alert's Rwanda team, and Farhod Abdurrahmanov, who is the head of International Alert's Tajikistan team and the program's manager for our work in the wider Central Asia region. Despite the diverse nature of the two contexts and the different approaches of the projects, we were able to draw together some common principles which the report author, Ruth Simpson, who is the head of International Alert's Conflict Hub, will introduce in more detail. Each speaker will present some of the key findings and lessons from the research, and this will be followed by a discussion, including an opportunity for the panel to answer any questions that you might have about the research. If you'd like to submit any questions, and we really do encourage you to do so, we're keen to have a good discussion, you can do so via the Q&A field at the bottom. So please do write your questions into the Q&A and we will do our best to get through as many as we possibly can. Similarly, if you'd like to post about the event on X or Twitter, as it was formerly known, you can tag International Alert. We're going to give you the hashtags, I think, in the chat. And you please use the hashtag Peace of Mind report. All the information will be posted in the chat. So before we start with the presentations, we thought we would like to share with you some of the voices of the people that took part in these projects. So we have a short video to share with you.
muri jenoside bafashe abana banjye bakabajyana ndeba nyine nyuma ya jenoside hari ubwo naryamaga nkaranshigagurika ndeba buri umwe mu bo mu muryango bose nyine bakagenda bazi isura yabo nzibona isura zabo nzibona nyine
igihe nari ifunze nageze ihungabana abo nishe nkabaruta mu nzozi nkababona noneho ku manywa aho nicaye hariya nkicara nigunze nkibera aho ngaho njyenyine umushinga uburyo wamfashijemo wampaye gutinyuka no gushira ubwoba icyo ni ikintu uwo mushinga wankoreye cyane, aho nitinyaga, none ubu ngubu nkaba sabana n'abo nakoreye icyaha, nkasabana n'abo n'abacitse ku icumu, nta kibazo ngirana nabo. Ubwo twaricaye tujya mu kagari muri sare tuganira ku byo twakoze twabakoreye.
baraje baratwigisha nyine iby'ubumwe n'ubwiyunge, tukumva bitashoboka gutyo uko baza bigezeho biradufata rwose, natwe twanazamukana cyangwa nuko twabaga turi muri sare tugasuhuzanya, ejo tukongera. Ubwo bigeze aho abagiye bakora ubukwe, hari umukobwa nashyingiye mbona bose bambaye za invitation ndazibaha bose, mbona barantwerereye. Once you have well psychological well-being, then you relate better with other people, and that brings peace between you and your colleagues as well as in the society, because you cannot build peace without having, a peace of mind, so that you are able to give peace also to others.
مقصد ما وقتش جنگ جنجالی هم محتاجیم، ولی همین ناحیه هم ما در یاردم کردن چی کردن، روحی روانی مقصد چی خیلی بدیشید، خیلی بهتر شیدم. مقصد هشم در همی کار میکردگی، سلامتی من مقصد در هم فکر خیالم در همی قطی رفتارم قطی همسایه و چی خیلی بدیشید.
پیش از زندگی شایسته داخل شدن خیلی کمبودی‌ها داشتم. پیش از برنامه زندگی من خیلی جنگ و جنجال ها، مثال من یگان کار کردن نمیتونستم، یگان چی نفروختن در دستم، یگان سوم نداشتم. همسایه هایی که در امی برنامه اشتراک کردن خیلی بهبودی ها دارن. حاضر بعد از این برنامه خیلی بهبودی ها هست در زندگی، خیلی سالمی جسم روحی روانی خیلی بهتر و بهتر ها شده است در زندگی. اول جنگ و جنجال ها مخایشه ها بسیار بود. حاضر در زندگی خیلی از روزی که همین رو مثلا این گوه گرفتم خیلی در زندگی شیر و چکش فروخته خیلی گودکام و مثال از چیه خودم خیلی بهبودی ها هست. حاضر مثال همین خودم شیر و چکر که میفروشم در زندگی هم کردستم، خیلی کم هم باشه که استفاده بودستم.
بهبودیشید همش همی پرابلمی من وای داشتم و یایم همی خیلی داشتن در اویله، یا که روحیشون چیشون جنسشون همش بهبودیشید، همش تینچیده. خیلی خیلاش میگن که بیا مورم در هوای برنامه تون چی کنید بگیرید، مایم خیلی زندگیمون تغییر بیاورد.
And just to remind people that that video and other videos are available to view on our website. So do, after this event, if you want to hear more, you can go and hear from more of our project participants. I'd now like to welcome our first speaker, Pacific Barihuta, who is going to discuss and share the findings from Rwanda. Pacific, over to you.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. Thank you, Hannah. Can I share my screen, Hannah?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you again. I hope everyone can see my screen. I'm going to present about the assessment of ALERT's mental health psychosocial support contributes to Rwanda's conflict recovery and long-term peace-building journey. As Hannah introduced me, I'm Pacifique Barihuta. I'm the program manager for ALERT Rwanda. To start with, I would say that you have seen in the video that this assessment was conducted building on our work in Rwanda. On two main projects, Duhuze and Fatanye Rumuri, that are funded by the US aid. So these projects, the recent one, the Fatanye Rumuri, is implemented in 30 districts and 2 sectors countrywide. So the study or the assessment also built on different assessments or studies that were conducted by different partners, including the Ministry the Ministry of Health through the National Mental Health Survey that was conducted in 2018, and also the Unity Club Survey that was conducted in 2020. So you can see on the screen that the findings were a bit alarming. On 3.6% of the general population that was experiencing the mental health issues, with 27.9% of genocide survivors of genocide against the Tutsi. You can also mention that the awareness of psychosocial support was at 61.7%, but only by that time 5.3% could use it. So they were a bit afraid of sharing their experiences and also using the services that were provided to them by then. In 2020, also a study by Unity Club revealed that there is a prevalence of trauma among young people, and most of them were from the category of youth who don't know their origins, others who were born from genocide survivors, and also another alarming findings was about women, young people who were born from women raped during the genocide against the Tutsi. So we wanted also to assess how far we have gone, how far our projects or our interventions around the country were contributing to peace building through these mental health and psychosocial support interventions. So the methodology that we used mixed approaches, qualitative. As you can see from the first slide, we conducted some desk review from previous research reports and project documents, some key informant interviews as well from representatives at local level and government officials, as well as international organizations and local organizations. We had also some focus group discussions in different districts. Quantitatively, we had distributed questionnaires to around 404 respondents distributed in 10 districts around the country. And also we used the Likert scale approach to ask questions. So going straight to the findings, we start with one aspect related to the exposure to violence, to gauge how our interventions have helped people to change their mindset and to not to rescue to violence when they are trying to resolve their conflicts. So as you can see also on the screen, is that the most prevailing violence that people think is psychological violence. And according to our key informants, one of the experts in mental health and psychosocial services and peace building revealed that probably some of the reasons are related to that genocide survivors are still deeply wounded. The people who witnessed the killings during the genocide against the Tutsis are still hurt. We have also those who lost their loved ones. They still have their wounds. So the psychological violence is still kind of prevailing among other types of violence that we can see on the screen. Another findings about the implication of PTSD, the post-trauma stress disorder, is that people are trying to avoid situations that could remind them of wars and genocide. They try to what we call in Kinyarwanda kurenzaho, trying to avoid or to pretend that they are not emotionally affected, yet they are not healthy in practice. So when we talk about the youth under 30 years of age, we could see that 5% of them, those that participated in our research, could also try to avoid situations that evoke war and genocide memories. And when you try to go deep in their behaviors or attitudes, when you talk about those memories, they start being physically aggressive, or they show physical negative reactions when you try to remind them about wars or genocide that took place during the bad history or the bad Rwanda's history. And another reaction is that they express anger, they also express resentment, and they abuse alcohol. I think for those who are in Rwanda or know the recent issues among the youth is that alcohol is really taking another stage, and the government is also working on it, showing that our research is also like showing what is happening on the ground, not only on in the places that we are intervening in, but also countrywide. It's a countrywide issue that both the government and the other stakeholders are dealing with. As you could see from the study from the on the mental health survey, the people who would seek service or healing services were still low at around 5%, but now among our participants, thanks to our projects, we have recorded a 62.1% overall, showing that this perception is also increasing, or the practices of seeking health healing services or trying to heal from the wounds and going to the psychologist and people who can give them support are also increasing. And this goes, of course, with the readiness to share personal sensitive stories during the groups that have diverse backgrounds. This also is increasing to the level of 54.9%. We wanted also to gauge the perception on mutual understanding within the society about the level of mutual trust and societal tolerance. We could see that there are good findings about the participation in saving groups or some economic activities to the level of 81%, 81.6%. But when it comes to the lower percentages about the like the variable of leaving children or people's children to the homes of people from different backgrounds, this one is still low. I think there are different explanations, but the main one is that when you are in a group, when you are sharing economic benefits or incentives, people tend to get together and to understand each other and also to show that tolerance rather than when it comes to like bringing the individual issues to members of the community, like leaving their children or inviting people from diverse background into their families or into their events. So those that are kind of individual-based or family-based are lower than the community-based. I think we can also talk about the frequency of collaboration with different categories of people, which is also increasing. Before, everyone could stay at home, being lonely, but this time the frequency of collaborating or meeting with different people from different backgrounds is also increasing. We have also participation, but there is still an issue, prevailing issue between level of dialogue between the adults and the youth on historical wounds, which also is kind of has increased, but not to the level that people would see. You could see a quote from a youth male from Gisagara district, that's in the southern province, who is testifying that I came to a therapy group because I always wondered why my parents were incarcerated. So different parents have not attained a level of telling the truth about where they were after the genocide against the Tutsi. They were incarcerated for a long time, but they don't explain directly to their children why and how they were taken there, and their role in the genocide against the Tutsi. For the sake of time, I will talk about just few findings and go to the sense of shared identity. This one is also a good finding whereby people now identify themselves as Rwandans. This is also a findings that is closer to the to the research that was conducted earlier in 2020 by the former National Unity and Reconciliation Commission, which revealed, I think by then it was 96%, and now in our zones of interventions and the people who took part to this assessment, the figures were raised to 99.2%, and thanks for Ndi Umunyarwanda program that is being orchestrated by the government of Rwanda. But we can still have some people who have now turned their language because in Rwanda, as I said, we are promoting Ndi Umunyarwanda and avoiding to identify ourselves through ethnic or former ethnic connotations. So, but people have now, some people, of course, they are turning to coded ethnic divisions, especially among the youth in schools or outside. So this one is another issue that we need to work on in our next interventions. So some success stories that were registered by the International Alert in Rwanda. There are mainly four. There are other many, but these key four are about facilitating therapy sessions and reconciliation dialogues among the communities. Supporting, of course, this one is also linked to our approaches, supporting community economic initiatives that foster unity and resilience, but also increase the economic aspects of the communities. They are addressing also intergenerational trauma to make sure that youth that grow in Rwanda grow in a society free of mental health and psychosocial issues. Of course, this goes hands in hands with the inclusivity and social cohesion among the community members. There are still challenges that are hampering or are causing the mental health and psychosocial support initiatives contribute to the peace building initiatives. We have decentering homegrown solutions. Some approaches are not really embraced by the community because they think they are taken from above. We have the external pressure on reconciliation participants. Those who are not participating in our programs have their own understanding, and sometimes it impacts also the level of understanding of our participants. Dealing with the intergenerational legacies, as I said, among the Rwandan youth, there are still issues of intergenerational trauma, which is really taking another step that people need, or the government and the other interventions need to also work on it. There is still a challenge of engaging urban, wealthy, and professional populations. We have seen, or participants have identified issues that only, I would say, community level or the rural population or uneducated population are targeted by these interventions. So there is still a low turn-up in urban settings of also wealthy people, those businessmen and other wealthy categories, and also people having professional jobs or official jobs in government, in local government, in civil society, in international organizations or multilateral organizations and other professions. I think we also need to see how we can integrate them or try to think about approaches that can attract them to also be part of the mental health and psychosocial support programs. There is a prevailing issue of resistance to locate the bodies of the victims of the genocide against the Tutsi so that they can bury their bodies in dignity. this also is still prevailing, especially among the survivors of the genocide against the Tutsi. So to kind of wrap up or conclude, there are also some required conditions for the mental health and psychosocial support to take really to contribute to the peace building. We need our approaches to be community-led during the post-genocide healing and reconciliation dialogues. As we saw, people don't really embrace the individual counseling, the individual therapies, but they really they have shown that community-led dialogues are the ones which are being successful at community level. But the challenge is still again, or the environmental conditions that we need to promote is to provide support, psychological, psychosocial support infrastructures. They are still low in Rwanda, and probably people need to invest in that. We need also some approaches that are trauma-informed, but also long-term, because sometimes these projects come and go. We have also sustainability plans, but really sometimes we need to have longer-term approaches that could allow people to benefit from this psychological support. The youth, I talked about the youth and also about the social, the cultural sensitivities, which could also be embedded in our programs to make sure that the youth who are the leaders of today and tomorrow could also benefit or could grow in a free, in a society which is free of mental health and psychosocial problems. So I think I stop here and I will hand over to Hannah for the next presentation. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Pacific. That was really interesting. Some extraordinary results coming out of your projects in Rwanda. Just to encourage everyone to please do. There'll be time for questions for Pacific and for our other panelists afterwards. So please do put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom. And meanwhile, we will now hear from Farhod Abdurrahmanov, who will share the findings from Tajikistan. Farhod, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear friends, and dear participants. We warmly welcome you from Dushanbe, from Tajikistan, and we're glad to present you today our research findings from Tajikistan. And please let me share my screen. I think everything is okay and we can start. So in Tajikistan, Alert conducted a study to assess the factors influencing mental health outcomes for survivors of domestic violence and the linkages between positive mental health outcomes and broader societal benefits. My colleague Pacific already explained about the methodology we used in both assessments. So in Tajikistan, we keep the same track, and the research involved 223 participants in a series of in-depth interviews and focus group discussions with wider community members, including representatives of authorities and civil society partners in 8 villages of the Hatlon province in South Tajikistan. Although government figures indicate that about 31% of married women aged from 15 to 49 have experienced different forms of spousal violence and emotional abuse during their lifetime. However, Alert research suggests it exceeds 60% actually, reaching more than 90% for women living with disabilities or parenting children with disabilities. Abuse is not only perpetrated by husbands. Young daughters-in-law particularly are at risk from other household members, especially mother-in-law. Most cases of domestic violence intimate partner violence, and those cases go unreported. The interviewers reported that domestic violence caused deep-seated psychological distress, particularly for women with disabilities. During the first 2 meetings with alert psychologists, almost 54 of all women and girls participated noted that they seriously thought at least once in a life about the suicide. This correlates actually with a steady increase in suicide cases over the 5 years in Tajikistan and confirmed by official statistics. These acute mental health crises are exacerbated in rural areas where hospitals and health centers are poorly equipped. Women say that their experiences of stress was primarily linked to emotional, psychological, and physical abuse, as well as pressure associated with economic insecurity. These factors negatively impacted self-confidence and self-esteem, leading to depression and a sense of hopelessness and isolation. Elder participants recognize that there are some services available, such as physical health care. They highlighted the challenge that families lacked resources to be able to tackle full advantage of them, either due to the cost of traveling to the centers and or the high costs related to treatment, medicines, roads, transportation, and etc. The economic damage caused by the civil war in Tajikistan, according to the primary official data of the 90s, amounted to more than 10 billion US dollars. So during the war, more than 150,000 houses were burned and 61 medical institutions were completely destroyed. Why we are talking about it? Because as my colleague Pacifico already mentioned, when we dived into the field and when we started to implement our first phase of Living with Dignity project, which brought the significant and striking achievements, mental health and psychological support in the areas affected by violence should always consider the specific drivers of conflict. And in Tajikistan, that has meant a dual focus on behavior change and livelihood support. So International Alert Living with Dignity project has worked with family members to look at the harmful attitudes and behaviors that are affecting women's physical and mental well-being. These norms tend to restrict women's rights and mobility and downplay their contribution to the family security. Livelihood strengthening and financial management programs have improved, first of all, family finances and eased a move towards better nonviolent communication, listening to each other, and reflection. And against this backdrop, the striking results, as I mentioned before, obtained during the implementation of the ALERT project in Khatlon South Park in Tajikistan during the first phase. So the majority of quantitative and qualitative data was collected from 2016 to 2022 implementation project period showed that up to 90% improvement in the emotional and the mental state women with disabilities has experienced, and also up to 76% peace of mind in family relationships where violence was previously noted. Improved mental health outcomes for women participate are closely related with improved quality of life and economic security at the family and community levels as well. And we also have the data from program implementation during the periods of 2018 and 2021, which we implemented in a slightly different geographical location, but with the same methodology, reflect that there had been a downward shift up to 24% in women feeling fearful on a weekly basis. Participants attributed this to the ability to express oneself, increased economic independence and security, perceptions of greater respect from family members, and the wider community feeling less stress, increased mobility, and less violence and quarreling, which all contributed to improve mental health. I do remember when young women during our first meeting participated in interviews say that my father-in-law could see that I was doing something for the family. As a part of income-generating activities, we bought and handed over her in part of our grant activities, the sewing machine. So she said that my father-in-law, when he saw that I'm bringing some income to the family, changed his attitude not only towards me, but towards entire family members. So now we are sitting together around one table and having a dinner together. For me, it was absolute happiness, she said. So this is briefly about our experience from Tajikistan, but what I want to say in the end, for the women of Tajikistan still suffering from gender violence and psychological distress, a large-scale expansion of livelihood support and mental health services cannot come soon enough. Over to you, dear colleagues, and I'm ready and I will be here for your questions.
Thank you so much, Farhad. And yes, do keep the questions coming, and I'll do my best to get through as many of them as we can in the discussion. But before we do that, I'd like to welcome Ruth Simpson, who is the head of our Conflict Hub at International Alert and who is the author of our Peace of Mind report. Ruth, over to you.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, colleagues, and thanks, participants. It's heartening to see so many of you and such active participation in the chat and Q&A, especially on World Mental Health Day. Complementing the experiences of my colleagues they've already shared in their presentations, I wanted to touch on some key issues related to conflict, mental health, and peace building that are based on the lessons learned from the study and some of the recommendations. So firstly, the linkages between conflict, mental health, and peace building are increasingly recognized by practitioners and policymakers alike. Conflict and violence negatively impact capacities for peace. Structural drivers of conflict, such as gender inequality, socioeconomic exclusion, discrimination, and lack of access to services, have all been shown to increase the risk of depression, anxiety, and PTSD. And this focus on integrated mental health and psychosocial support and peace building seeks to enhance the sustainability of peace building and well-being outcomes, as treating them in silos not only serves to limit impact, but could also do harm. Without careful planning and adequate support, MHPSS services, especially those centered around trauma, can risk unintentionally re-traumatizing individuals, especially without specialized approaches, infrastructure, and referral mechanisms. And the ways in which mental health, peace building, and well-being are interlinked are deeply dependent on the context, as we've seen from the presentations in Rwanda and Tajikistan, and are nuanced by the diverse experiences of violence and understandings of mental health. So I'd like to shine a bit of a spotlight on some of the lessons that are in the study. I won't have time to go through all of them in detail, but they are detailed in the report. So the first is on the importance of a conflict-sensitive approach. This includes ensuring that it's framed within how people experience and see mental health and peace-building work, and that concrete improvements vary among individuals based on their own priorities and needs, as well as their age, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and experiences of violence. For example, participants in Rwanda saw activities such as savings groups, harvesting, and weddings as contributing to community well-being. In Tajikistan, as Farhad mentioned, through sitting at the table with the family for meals, but also through the ability to contribute to the economic security of the family, also improve both well-being, but a sense of being able to contribute to broader social well-being and social cohesion. We also see that socioeconomic development plays a central role in improving individual and community well-being, as well as contributing to social cohesion outcomes. Findings from both programs clearly demonstrated the importance of income generation and livelihoods to people's sense of individual well-being, as well as for community cohesion. Almost all of the respondents in Rwanda, for example, understood reconciliation in terms of partnership and collaboration through income generation activities. And in Tajikistan, increased income and financial security enhanced well-being of individuals and families. Although what we do see is that shame and stigma continue to create barriers and limit active engagement in MHPSS programs. This can relate to experiences of roles in and attitudes towards violence, as well as the negative stereotyping around mental health. We also see that understanding gender is at the heart of providing effective peace-building programs which integrate mental health and well-being. We see from both contexts that women and men of different age groups and different backgrounds with different experiences and perspectives on mental health, well-being and violence need to have approaches that are tailored to their diverse needs and experiences, and that actively address the barriers that women and men face. Another aspect of the programs which was seen as a critical success factor was creating and maintaining safe spaces for dialogue, healing and reconciliation. These support interactions among diverse community members across social divides, as well as fostering intergenerational dialogue. In Rwanda, this involved dialogue and therapy groups, and in Tajikistan, this involved spaces which facilitated sensitization around violence against women and girls. The last lesson learned that I wanted to touch on today was just the reflection on the challenges of leveraging individual transformation and the very real tangible benefits that direct project participants feel to wider community well-being and social cohesion outcomes. Both programs saw positive results among direct project participants and evidence of better community dynamics. In Tajikistan, for example, this relates to higher rates of nonviolent communication and a growing willingness for others in the community to ask for help. In Rwanda, this encompassed improved community relationships through joint activities. However, given contextual challenges, not all positive changes could be leveraged at a wider community level. It's important to acknowledge and recognize the risk of putting the onus on the individual, given the importance of these social, institutional, and systemic factors that influence well-being and social cohesion. And this diagram here sums up what we've seen from the study as 7 principles or key elements of effective peace-building programming which integrate MHPSS. Although there were elements that were relevant across all contexts, although they were applied in different ways with different entry points, depending on specific individual and community needs. And for the interest of time, I won't go into each in detail, although I can do later in the Q&A. And I have already touched on several of the 7 facets in the previous slide on lessons learned, such as on taking a context-specific approach, creating safe spaces for dialogue, or addressing gender barriers to participation. I wanted to focus on 2 elements which I haven't touched on in detail already. The first is on redress for past violence, such as legal assistance for survivors of violence. In different ways, justice and access to legal assistance and remedy were important in both contexts. In Rwanda, the majority of respondents saw apology, restorative justice, and access to legal processes as key facets to reconciliation. In Tajikistan, over 800 sessions on social services and legal advice were provided to support women and families, demonstrating a demand for support when they had questions related to their rights and social assistance, in particular for women with disabilities. The other area that I also wanted to touch on was the importance of providing capacity development on skills for non-violent communication, peaceful resolution of disputes. This was relevant in both contexts, and one of the key elements of success, for example, in Tajikistan was changes in attitudes around non-violence, but there was always an opportunity in both contexts to build on those achievements, to develop a locally grown network of champions and be able to further signpost support for provision of such services. And then underpinning all of these 7 principles is local ownership and partnership. This is, for example, with local authorities, service providers and community peace building groups, to support locally grown approaches and build on existing services that are already there. So in sum, these 7 elements underline the fact that approaches need to be multifaceted and provide tangible social and economic benefits for individuals and communities. And this includes addressing structural drivers of conflict and violence that lead to inequality, challenge healthy social bonds, and undermine community well-being. So then, just to finish, the study highlights 7 recommendations for working on mental health, psychosocial support and peace building in fragile settings. And the first 5 relate to the nature of the interventions. So as already mentioned, the importance of ensuring that these are grounded in the local context. And in practice, this means that project participants should be having a leading role in prioritizing the nature of the interventions, including defining parameters for success. Approaches should be holistic and integrate mental health and psychosocial support, conflict and violence prevention, and provide tangible socioeconomic benefits, both for individuals and for wider communities. Programs should create safe, inclusive spaces for dialogue to overcome challenges and divides, and also to help create environments for discussions on historical wounds and sensitive topics. Additionally, strengthening local capacities for non-violent communication and peaceful management of disputes is critical, as improving well-being doesn't in all cases necessarily change attitudes to violence, and it's critical to work on this as part of a holistic approach. And then the 5th component around the nature of such interventions relates to actively working on negative gender norms that increase psychological distress and compound stigma that create barriers to access for such services. And then the final 2 recommendations relate to partnerships and enhancing investment for local support services. So increased investment to help ground and create sustainable infrastructure for mental health, psychosocial support services, as well as building on interdisciplinary partnerships between peace building networks, development organisations, those that specialise in mental health and well-being, as well as justice services, so that approaches can be joined up, holistic and sustainable. Thank you very much. I'll pass it back to Hannah.
Thanks so much, Ruth. That was really thorough insight into all of the lessons that we've been able to draw from these 2 different, but also in some ways similar projects in these 2 very different contexts. We'll now open up to a bit of discussion. As I say, I'll try and get through as many of your questions as possible. Please, if you do have questions, put them in the Q&A. If they're for a specific person, please do indicate that. That would be helpful. Meanwhile, I think we'll start. There have been a few questions around young people, I think, for Pacific and for the Rwanda work. So I think if we start potentially by perhaps asking you, Pacific, to talk a little bit more about how you engaged young people in this work, and whether you have, if you've got some stories you can share with us about how intergenerational dialogue, which I know is a key part of the work that you do, how that has helped communities.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hannah, and the persons who have asked their questions through the Q&A section. How do we integrate intergenerational trauma, or how do we address this issue with engaging youth? As we said in the introduction, we have different groups that are at community level that also have facilitators. So among these groups, we have youth groups. Again, we are now, I think from 2-3 months ago, we have started the intervention with the schools. So we have started creating groups, therapy groups, and dialogues at school levels. We have now 60 schools, 2 schools per each district. And this one is also helping tackling these issues of intergenerational trauma, because we believe that when they start discussing about the issues, when there's this different groups of youth that we have enumerated at the beginning, when they discuss about their problems, on their traumas, on their wounds that they are experiencing following the genocide committed against the Tutsi. And remember that this youth, most of them were not born when the genocide was committed. And they are experiencing actually trauma from their families or from the issues they are having at the household level. So discussing them, or having time of safe spaces for dialogue will also enable them reduce this trauma and understand the real issues that are affecting our communities, especially the youth community. I'm sure we are with the Rwanda team here. So anyone who needs, who can contribute to this can also raise their hand and supplement me. Thank you.
Thanks, Pacific. And I think we have one more question for you, which is just a simple question around your statistics, and the question is from Shoshana, saying the statistics presented are impressive. Are there any baseline figures to compare them to?
Yes, although this is not a midline or another kind of evaluation of the projects that we have mentioned, but we have the baseline. Actually, for the Duhuze project, we have the baseline, the midline, and also the evaluation, the endline evaluation reports, because the Duhuze closed in 2022. But for the USAID Dufatanye Rumuri project, which is now running in all the districts, we have the baseline. And also this assessment can give you different figures. And I need also to emphasize that the figures that we presented were just for the sake of this this study, this peace of mind study, which was conducted also all trying to contribute to the mental health, psychosocial support contribution to peace building, an assessment that was conducted for the entire project. So we have this report as well. So if anyone is interested, they can still come to our office, and real soon the report will be also posted to the website of International Alert.
Thanks, Pacific. Question for Farhad. There's a couple of questions around Someone keen to know, Jacqueline, what interventions you have done with women with disabilities. And I think link to that, it'd be interesting to hear a bit more about the linkage that you strongly identify between economic independence and positive mental health outcomes.
Thank you, Hannah. The answer for the first question. So indeed, there had been significant improvement in economic and food security due to involvement in income-generating activities, especially for the families where we had our final beneficiaries, women with disabilities or parenting children with disabilities. So what happened, according to our statistics, it was almost 90% we got the positive effect, both in terms of positive mental health and entire position within the family. So when the women started to generate the income, we created that platform with our small grant activities. We, through the entire process of the project implementation, we pick up the skills and then upgraded the skills, or if there was no skills and no ability due to the disability, then we created an additional atmosphere environment for creating those kind of income generating activities, like creating the small in-house or next to the house shops or other different. But what happened from one side, the mental health and psychosocial support gave them, I would even not fear to say that they gave them the second life. So they started to go out for some families where we had the mother as a professional teacher, but she was spending all entire time just for looking and after her daughter with disability. When we granted her the wheelchair, it helped her to go back to the school and start teaching and start continue her professional career. I assume I answered both questions in one reply, yeah, but would it be sufficient or should I dive into details?
I mean, I think that was a perfect example of exactly how all of those things interlink and how how one sort of begets the other. And I think it was such a key finding of this research, wasn't it, that there's such an interdependence of all of these different factors, which Ruth so eloquently outlined in the 7 elements, all these different pieces of the puzzle that we need to put together in order to have effective interventions that lead to really strong peace building outcomes, both in terms of community cohesion, in terms of individual mental health, and in terms of feeling hopeful for the future and independence. So I think that was a perfect explanation. I'm going to move on to Chloe's question because it incorporates another person's question as well, and she's keen to hear the team's reflections on the utility of mental health and psychosocial support in the conflict prevention part of peace building, upstream of violent conflict emerging or re-emerging. And I'm not sure if Ruth wants to take that on. And then there's a second question to anyone really who wants to answer it about the time-intensive nature of programming that integrates mental health and psychosocial support and peace building, and how it's possible to scale up that type of programming when it is so time-intensive. But the first of this question, Ruth, perhaps you can reflect on how mental health and psychosocial support can contribute to conflict prevention as well as sort of conflict recovery. Ruth, can I hand over to you?
Sure. Yes. It could also be interesting to hear from colleagues with their reflections from the specific projects. But from my perspective, I see these things as very linked from what we've seen in the research, having a sense of well-being, a sense of safety and security at a personal level, contributes to improving societal relations, building trust, and these are all critical in terms of conflict prevention and peace building, and also building social cohesion and resilience more broadly. So these things are interlinked, and we see that in different ways in the different approaches of the projects, but that's why that it seems a sort of critical integrated approach that they're mutually supporting. So mental health, psychosocial support alone can't necessarily prevent conflict, but conflict prevention processes which don't acknowledge and consider the impacts, both individual and community, of mental distress or poor well-being also aren't as effective.
Thanks, Ruth. Pacific or Farhad, I don't know if you want to come in on that, and also maybe to talk a bit about how we might scale up or expand mental health and peace building programming to reach more people.
Yeah, Hannah, if I may, and then I can hand over to Pacific. So what we have in Tajikistan, it's easy to justify something when you have the clear data that you achieve, that you can prove it. And we have collected the significant and striking data which can prove any kind of proposal. It's from the first step as to prepare the project proposal or to convince the potential donors. I want to touch upon the entire systematic approach that we still lacking here in Tajikistan. We mentioned, both me and Pacific, that the countries went through a difficult time in the modern history. And we monitor, we observe here that the systematic gap of the mental health and psychosocial support exists in the country. So if we will target both on a policy level, on education, on a higher level education, and plus if we will bring as a justification our clear examples and improvements and achievements that will be easy to scale up in any kind of geographical location. Over.
Thanks so much, Farhad. Pacific, do you have any reflections?
Yes, I do. Basing on our contribution to conflict resolution or peace building, we believe that integrating mental health and psychosocial support can also contribute to conflict prevention in such a way that, for example, if we are tackling the issue of transgenerational trauma, we are preventing conflict because, as you know, most of you know, the youth has been manipulated during the genocide against the Tutsi, and most of them contributed negatively to these atrocities. And if we tackle it, if we try to prevent the mental health and the psychosocial issues, we believe that we will be directly preventing conflict or preventing another genocide to occur in Rwanda, but also in the Great Lakes region, because those communities we are helping or we are working with are not only within Rwanda, but they are also at the borders. And other projects that we are implementing also trying to promote peaceful cohabitation or social cohesion. We believe that it also contributes to the region as a whole, not only in Rwanda. And how do we expand it to reach more people? This is probably a very difficult question because we rely on funds from different contributors or donors. And as I said, we are in 2 sectors for each district. And people are asking, I think it was also one of the findings that those that are benefiting from these interventions cannot, they live in other people in other communities, and they have this pressure of asking them, how are you, why are you discussing with those people who are not in the same category of ours? And this pressure, if we make sure that we expand the interventions to other sectors or to other individuals, because even in the sectors that we're contributing to, we don't reach the whole population. So if we manage at least to reach a bigger number or a wider coverage, that would be helpful, and it will also contribute to the conflict prevention in Rwanda and in the region as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Pacific. So we have another question from Brian Stanley, which is interesting. It says that in other contexts, particularly in Sierra Leone, the lesson that came out of mental health projects was that while community cohesion was improved, individual trauma was often re-triggered through these processes, demonstrating the need for individual counselling as well. And I wondered if either Pacific or Farhad would like to reflect on the kind of individual impact of the approaches that you've taken, and whether there has been any, what the kind of combination was of individual counselling and group support, and whether you found that there was that in your interventions as well.
Indeed, I fully agree and share the view that our participant mentioned. When we had the individual counseling, once we had a very difficult case scenario when the family experienced the loss of their dears. It happened first during the Civil War. They lost the father, and it happened just recently in March when they lost the husband in another conflict. So one family, two women experienced the same tragedy in less than 30 years. And when we started, we applied the same approach, and we actually were expecting that we will reach after the 2 or 3 counseling meetings the same achievement, but vice versa, as our participant mentioned, it triggered another deep-lying trauma with mother. Why I mentioned that, yeah, indeed, there are some exceptions happens, but when we take the entire statistics, the entire both on the cases of community level and individual cases, we have indeed striking positive achievements. Over.
Thanks, Farhad. Pacific, did you want to come back on that as well with any thoughts?
Yes, I would say that individual counseling is also important. In our interventions, actually, as I explained before, we start with group counseling, but there is a room because we have our local partners who are experienced in dealing with the psychosocial support. And when there is a need of a particular participant who needs to have individual counseling, so they also intervene in that. Another thing is that at each health center at sector level, there is a staff who is dedicated to mental health support and psychosocial support. So when that case is a bit beyond our capacities, we can also refer to the health center, and this also helps in improving their mental health as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Pacific. We've got time for one more question, and I think I might direct this one to Ruth, as it's around the sustainability of mental health interventions like these over people's lifetimes, but also the ability to keep delivering them. And I wondered if you had any reflections, given some of the recommendations in the report, about what message you'd like to send to people or authorities or organizations working in conflict or post-conflict contexts about the importance of sustainably providing mental health and psychosocial support, and what the ingredients are for this.
Thanks, Hannah, for the question. It's certainly a challenging one, but I think in terms of the recommendations from the report, there's a very clear one around increased investment in mental health and psychosocial support services, and the need to embed these within existing and also strengthen in existing infrastructure. Also building on community networks and those existing resources within communities, those individuals and groups that have been identified as active. We've seen that participants within projects are being solicited to provide information, signposting and support. And so that's a way that these become sustainable and help grow. And I think then additionally around these linkages between partnerships at different levels. So between local networks, service providers, authorities, but also sharing in a broader network of expertise across different disciplines, but also at different levels with international support. So it's a mixture of elements, but perhaps at the core sort of increased investment, long-term thinking, and really focusing on inclusive partnerships.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ruth. We're going to have to stop there. Thanks everyone for your time today and your brilliant questions. I'm sorry we weren't able to get through them all. Thank you again to our incredible panelists, Pacifique, Farhad and Ruth. I've been able to see a little bit on the chat. There's so many. It's really great to see so much interest in this issue, so many people working on it. It'd be incredible to continue the conversation. Our research is available on the website, and there's also more videos and stories of the people that took part in the projects. You can also sign up on our website to get our latest news and research, and do follow International Alert on X, formerly known as Twitter, and LinkedIn. I think there's been some inquiries about whether this will be available, a recording will be available. They will be. So we'll share that via our social media channels and via our newsletter. So if you're not already signed up to our newsletter, please do, and it'll be there. And we'll also share a link to the research to everyone who attended today. So just finally leaves me to wish you all a very happy and hopeful World Mental Health Day. I hope you continue to mark it in suitably appropriate ways. And thanks once again for your time today. Goodbye, everyone.